many parents forbid their children to eat sweets, they're quite happy to allow themselves to gobble up as many as possible. The survey was done by a magazine, and it showed that children are bought sweets by fewer than 2 out of every 10 parents. But the parents are quite happy to buy more than 3 times as many sweets for themselves. However, it seems parents aren't being mean. It's that they're prepared to make a much greater effort to look after their children's health. Their own teeth and health just don't seem to get the same priority treatment. And finally, flocks of mischievous cockatoos are causing havoc in Australia. The birds have flown from the wild and attacked buildings in and around the city of Sydney. Using their sharp beaks, they're eating everything they can find. They're causing lots of damage, and zoo officials haven't managed to catch them yet. The cockatoos are ripping up large tufts of grass from Sydney's Royal Botanic Gardens, as well as eating anything else they can easily spot: flowers, plants, and leaves from the trees. The worst damage has been at the Botanical Gardens herbarium, where the rubber lining on the roof has been torn away and many rare plants killed. But the birds are showing no signs of being sorry. They're carrying on their feast without a care. And that's all from Newsround today. So until about the same time tomorrow, bye-bye.
Blue Peter's back soon with a bang. And special reports from the Soviet Union. Don't miss new presenter Yvette Fielding and Karen and Mark with news of their exciting expedition. They join the top Moscow gymnast school and make a spectacular appearance at the Moscow State Circus. Smashing! Blue Peter back on Monday at 5:05 into its 30th year now. And they've got their youngest ever presenter, you saw her there, young Yvette Fielding, and she's from Stockport in Manchester, just near me. So good luck to you, Yvette. I hope everything goes well for you. I met her at the press conference yesterday. She's lovely. Anyway, enough of this. Travelling across China by a steam train, by road, and by camel. John Craven, a Newsround special. This is called Travelling the Silk Road.
Hello from one of the world's least visited places. I am in northwestern China, and over there, behind that gate, is the Soviet Union. The border here has been closed to people for many years now. Only a few Russian trucks are allowed through. And in fact, I am the first person from any Western country to be allowed to visit here since 1949. But I'm not going to be on my own for very long, though, because tonight the border will be opened for just a little while after all these years, so that a group of travellers from Britain and America can pass from Russia into China. And as they do so, they'll be making a little bit of history. And that's quite fitting, really, because the great journey that they're recreating is in all the history books. They've travelled from Europe and now into Asia along the ancient trading route known as the Silk Road. Charing Cross Station in London was where the great journey began. A Chinese dragon, now apparently living in Britain, set the right sort of mood as the travellers waited for an epic announcement.
There's a special announcement. The train at platform 6 is the 0915 Silk Road Express for Paris, Salzburg, and all stations to China.
For the next 7 weeks and on 10 different trains, the Silk Road Express will cover 7,000 miles. First across Europe and then into Asia, the east of the Soviet Union and finally China. Border guards and our cameras were there to meet the buses that brought the travellers into China from Russia. There'd been a delay on the Soviet side during this history-making crossing, and it was dark and cold when they came out of no man's land to the border post at Horgos. The Chinese guards cut down the customs checks, but there were still the usual forms to fill in.
Stopover places and dates will just write roughly the countries that we've been to and the dates just for
Oh.
The date and originating place.
You want the date?
Oh my.
The local band had been practicing all day for the big moment when this group of Western holidaymakers walked into China. The action behind the scenes had been nail-biting. For a long time, it looked as though the Russians might keep the border closed. But Mr. Gorbachev, the Russian leader, is wanting to make friends again with China and saw this as a gesture of goodwill. So the gates opened to a carnival welcome.
It is exciting. We've looked forward to it for a long time. It all went so well, very smoothly.
And this was the first glimpse of China in daylight. Herds of wild horses roaming across a snowy landscape beside the beautiful Seiram Lake with the heavenly mountains in the background. The land is barren and hostile and normally forbidden to outsiders by the Chinese government. This is the only road for hundreds of miles, the original trading route now traveled by lorries. Many centuries ago, the Chinese were the first to use horses in their armies, horses like these from these mountains. Men and horses and dogs have worked together ever since in this remote place, surviving somehow despite the bitter cold and lack of any kind of comfort, driving cattle across the great wasteland. All along the Silk Road, there are places to eat, wayside cafes serving delicious pastas. Legend has it that one of the most famous travelers, Marco Polo, loved Chinese noodles so much that he took the recipe back to his hometown of Venice 700 years ago. And that's how Italians got their spaghetti. Coming into China by this route, you notice straight away how many different kinds of faces there are. The country is made up of 56 different nationalities, and many of the smaller groups live around the borders. Elsewhere in this land of 1,000 million people, they are vastly outnumbered by the main Chinese race. But here, the minorities are in the majority. They grow grapes and melons here because in the summer the temperature reaches 30 centigrade. But in the winter, it plunges to -30, making it one of the coldest places on Earth. And fancy finding out that in northwest China, the most popular snacks in the local market are kebabs, something much more Middle Eastern than Chinese. Each kebab costs 2.5 pence, which seems cheap, but the average wage is only about £3 a week. On the station at the big city of Urumqi waits the last of the 10 trains on the Silk Road Express. The carriages have been brought from all over China. It's the first time the country's railway service has organized an event as big as this, and they're certainly putting on a show. Though the music and dancing goes on, it's time to get on board, with smartly uniformed conductresses making sure that nobody gets left behind. This is me. Oh, this looks rather comfy. And these compartments will be base now for the passengers for the next 1,600 miles as we travel across China. And indeed, we'll be taking a lot of our meals on this train, and sometimes we'll be sleeping here as well because these seats turn into bunk beds at night. And off we go. Steam engine fans among the passengers are disappointed it's a diesel pulling the train, but they are promised there will be steam later in the journey. This is the first musical send-off in China, but by no means the first along the route. In fact, there have been so many in so many countries, the passengers almost take it for granted. We'd gone along bumpy roads to Urumqi. Now, as we head for Dunhuang, an ancient trading place, the Silk Road is once again a railroad. It'll be single track all the way, and though we're safe and comfortable in our compartments, we know that just the other side of the window is one of the bleakest places anywhere, the Gobi Desert. The barren peaks of the flaming mountains normally flash red like fire in the blazing sun. But when we were there, the sun was trapped in a dust haze, so the mountains didn't flame. They're set in a massive hole in the earth called the Turfan Basin. The only place lower than this is the Dead Sea. And scattered around are many dead towns. Their buildings, deserted for centuries, blend into the surrounding rocks. This can be the hottest place in China, so hot that raindrops evaporate before they can reach the ground. And sandstorms sweep through the Turfan Basin scores of times every year. It was never an easy place in which to live. This was once the royal city of Gaochang. It's close to Turfan, and 1,500 years ago, it was a very important place, a vital trading center in this great desert. And 30,000 people lived and worked inside its walls. And then, for lots of different reasons, it began to die. And now it's just one of the ancient ruined cities along the Silk Road. But local people today still use donkey power just as they did when Gaochang was a great city. And there's another traditional form of transport. Well, this was a great surprise. I never thought we'd come across camels in China. We go. In Dunhuang, the desert is just how it should be. Miles of sweeping sand dunes instead of the endless expanse of flat, broken earth that makes up the Gobi Desert. During the great days of the Silk Road, caravans of camels carried merchants from China to the west and back again. Marco Polo came this way, becoming a trusted friend of the emperor and writing a vivid account of his adventures here during the Middle Ages. In fact, the Silk Road eventually took two routes, one the northern way, the other westwards from China, and writers of the time likened them to threads of silk weaving friendship. And as well as bringing silk to Europe, the traders also carried things like porcelain, jade, carpets, and even rhubarb. Just to make this desert picture complete, here at Dunhuang there's even a classic oasis, which local people call the Crescent Moon Spring. But elsewhere in this desert, nature provides not one single drop of water, so man has to find it. The water is brought from distant hills by underground culverts, which burst into the open when they reach the thirsting villages. This life-saving water also irrigates the land all around, so the peasants can produce grapes, melons, and cotton. In a simple way, they are beating nature every day. Back on the tracks again, and at last we're amongst the steam engines. There's good news for the fans. The next section of the journey will be pulled by one of their beloved locos. But for some reason which at first we can't understand, the top men at China Rail seem far from happy that we want to film steam engines, even though they power more than half the trains in China. We explained to the officials that many Westerners love steam engines, and some of them come on journeys like this just to see steam trains. Eventually, after many meetings, we did get permission, and the engine got ready for work. The problem, we reckon, was that the railway chiefs were worried in case the film made their service look old-fashioned, out of date, because they used so much steam. They much preferred us to film their diesels. But in a country where there seem to be no pollution controls and there's plenty of coal, steam engines will be around for a long time to come. Some of our passengers, though, especially those who aren't train enthusiasts, say they actually prefer the diesels because they don't belch out soot and grit. On this train, coal is also used for central heating and on the open fire in the kitchen. And it takes great skill to do this on a moving train. Everything is freshly cooked for every meal, as it is almost everywhere in China. Hardly anything is pre-cooked or frozen. All over China now, foreign visitors are enjoying the food and meeting the people. Yet only a few years ago, all foreigners were banned. But the country's new leaders welcome strangers, and the strangers try their best to master the different ways of the Chinese.
And I said, well, I don't know, but if you really try to close it, then I'll try.
And while the travelers swap their stories, China itself benefits from all the foreign money they bring into the country. And onward goes the train from Dunhuang across the desert to Juchuan, where we'll take a short bus ride to see one of the wonders of the world.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to reach the Great Wall in 2 minutes now. We leave from here at 11 o'clock because, as you realize, the Chinese did not calculate that our train from a different station would leave at a different time. So
Rolf is one of the team of guides who've been with the travelers right along the Silk Road. They know the places of interest and stop people getting lost.
And we go back to our home base, the train again. Thank you.
So we've got just a short while to look around the beginning, or the end, depending on which way you look at it, of one of mankind's finest masterpieces. Many of the buildings and some of the wall have been restored and look just as they did when it was first put up to keep out invaders. Now tourists invade the wall near the capital, Peking, but here it's so remote that hardly anyone sees its splendor. This great fortress marks the very western end of the Great Wall of China. From here it stretches for 3,700 miles across deserts, snowy mountains and valleys. It took 1 million people to build it, and it's the only man-made thing on Earth that can be seen from outer space. Work first began on the wall more than 2,000 years ago, when families were given the task of each building a small section. It was completed about 700 years ago, about the time that Marco Polo was on his travels. It remains the greatest man-made landmark in history. And this wide and muddy river marks the end of the desert. It's the Yellow River, and here it flows to the city of Lanzhou, home of the famous flying horse. This statue is a large replica of the beautiful sculpture that was found in an ancient tomb some years ago. China today is a land of bicycles, hundreds of millions of them, and the best model of all is not the flying horse, but the flying pigeon, with its name written in English on the frame. A new flying pigeon costs about 3 months' wages, so people have to save long and hard. But almost everyone seems to have some sort of bike. Throughout the journey, I've been on the lookout for the kind of Chinese buildings that you see painted on tea sets. There don't seem to be many left. These were in a public park in Lanzhou. School parties go on outings to look at the old buildings. Pupils get lots of chances to study their country's past. But for the children of China, today is an exciting time. A few years ago, this communist country went through what for millions was a terrible time. It was called the Cultural Revolution. There was much suffering, children were taken from their parents, and everyone had to learn the writings of their leader, Chairman Mao. After his death, things got better, and today's children spend more time on learning and less on politics. I couldn't help noticing that China's youngest people don't wear nappies. Instead, there are convenient slits in their pants for any little emergencies. To try and stop the huge population from getting much bigger, couples are told that if they have only one child, they'll be rewarded by the government. If they have more, those rewards will be taken away. There's now a generation growing up without any brothers and sisters, and government posters urge parents to keep it like that. All children have to go to school, and when I called into this classroom, without much warning, they practiced their English, and I tried out some Mandarin Chinese. Ni hao. That means hello. Hello. Xie xie. Because that means thank you, doesn't it? Thank you. Yes. And I think they've been learning a song for us, haven't they? And a Happy New Year to you as well. Thank you. Thank you. Xie xie. Xie xie. Now it's the last leg of the pioneering journey, 423 miles to Xi'an. This was the ancient capital of China when Peking was just a village. The landscape is turning green. We're out of the desert and into a fertile valley. Not much of China is like this. It's mostly mountains and wasteland, so they grow whatever they can, wherever they can. Farmers hand much of their crops to the government, but sell the rest for profit. For the passengers, it's almost the end of a very long train journey that's cost them 50 pence a mile. And the guides like Chris, Hilary and Gary have helped open up a new holiday route. So how have the Chinese coped with us?
Very well. I mean, they've had one or two problems of organisation because I don't think the China Railways have organised anything so massive before, but they've been extremely friendly and they've really tried to do everything possible to make our trip as pleasant and as enjoyable for everybody as possible. There have been one or two changes being made, perhaps a little late, but on the whole it's all been done with the best intentions of making everything very successful.
And Chris, when we finally reach Xi'an, you'll be meeting your Chinese wife, who you haven't seen for quite a while.
Yes, that's right. I haven't seen her for about 2 months now. We got married last April. But although she's had the visa to go to Hong Kong and to England for some months now, we felt it was better to wait until the end of the season, until I finish work, and then go out together.
How did you meet?
She was a local guide in Peking, and it started from there.
And how does she feel about leaving China now and going to live in Britain?
She's very excited about it, of course, but for Chinese people especially, it's a great wrench to leave their family and their country, and Chinese people tend to look with a certain amount of mistrust upon or have done traditionally, upon somebody who's going to be leaving China, and so it is doubly hard for her.
It's cabaret time on board the Silk Road Express with entertainment provided by the cabin crew. This is the umpteenth ethnic dance they've sat through during the past few weeks, but it's the first one on the move. So the Silk Road now weaves ever closer to the source of its name, where the fibres made by a certain caterpillar are turned into the smoothest of fabrics. Steam has brought us to Xi'an, the place where the Silk Road began. And steam is all around in this factory, where they weave the beautiful silk. These days, the foreigners who come to Xi'an have got nothing at all to do with the silk trade. More likely than not, they're here to see what's rapidly becoming China's #1 tourist attraction. It's a tomb, only discovered in 1973. And inside this tomb is a whole army of warriors. To protect them, a massive building like an aircraft hangar has been put up. Inside, we can expect a staggering sight. But visitors, including us, are banned from taking pictures of these national treasures. So this is officially approved film. The warriors are made from terracotta clay. They're life-sized, and every one is different. They're lined up in battle formation, and the ones that are on show are at the head of the army. There are perhaps 6,000 more hidden beneath the earth, stretching back for a kilometre to the tomb of the emperor that they've guarded for 2,000 years. There are no plans to excavate the rest of the army, but archaeologists hope to start work on the tomb itself in a few years' time. After this highlight, a trip to the neighbouring food market, and passengers reflect on their journey of a lifetime.
I think of all the countries we've been through, it's about 8 or 9 countries, I think the Chinese cooking was the best of all.
Now, back home in Cambridge, you're a car park attendant, aren't you?
Yes.
How do you manage to raise the money for this sort of holiday?
Well, I like to have a little tilt on the stock market from time to time, but for this holiday, I spent some of my capital. But this is my 3rd holiday this year, so I've done quite well.
Rosie, you're the oldest person on the trip, aren't you? How old are you?
Yes, I am. I'll be 85 in March. Not quite, but I hope to be there and do some more of these beautiful trips. Now,
it's been a long and arduous journey, this. How have you stood up to it?
Well, I'm still walking on my 2 legs. I still remember things that I see, and I don't take notes because I want to remember them. And according to my little roommate, she says, "You're great, you remember everything, and you don't take notes."
Well, looking back now on the trip, almost at journey's end, how's it been?
Fantastic. Really has been, because we've been to China before, but this was a totally different China than what we saw in '78.
How's it changed?
Well, then we were in Peking and the cities, and it was just one mass of blue and black hair. Now it's all colours, and people are much freer, and we've seen the village life, which we didn't see before, which is most interesting.
This was the greatest greeting of them all, at the last stop along the road. 500 children with drums, gongs, trumpets and voices, belting a message of friendship. Chris's wife, Ming, was there to meet him. She'd be leaving her homeland to live in Britain, so for her, this was a special farewell. And all this because the ancient Silk Road is open once again. This time, not to merchants and adventurers, but to holidaymakers. There'll be many more who'd love to follow us along this magnificent road.
terrific. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. I'll tell you what the interesting bit was. Remember when he was on the camel, riding along through the desert there, talking about the merchants, talking about the exotic things that they used to bring along, porcelain, jade, silk, and rhubarb. That's very bizarre. I used to get rhubarb from my back garden. Anyway, that was good fun. I enjoyed that. Well done, Newsround team people. Did you see the Blue Peter special on Monday? It's lovely when you're in, the Wet and Wonderful thing. You know, when they were swimming in the Serpentine, and they had the underwater pop concert, and we, at Children's BBC, did our own underwater pop concert. You know, the cup over the head with the ukulele. Remember that? I've had a communication about this from North London. It says, it is said that TV does not influence behaviour. Yet I wonder how many viewers were willing, She Who Must Be Obeyed, to pour the water over Andy Crane's head after that appalling joke about the underwater pop concert. Well, thank you, Mr. Edward Griffiths of Highbury and London N5. Hey, with friends like you, who needs enemies? Well, I'm glad you enjoy Children's BBC anyway. And I've had a T-shirt, look at this. It says Cool Cat on it. So it can't be for me, it must be a mistake. But it's come from Shishkine in the Isle of Arran, which is in Scotland, and it has come from Morven Campbell. So Morven, thank you very much indeed for that. She Who Must Be Obeyed's pen is actually very faint today, so the old menu that she's put under the camera is like Squintsville. I can hardly see it. So, so it's another Radio Times one today. Morph's on, brilliant, I love it. Morph's on at 4:10 tomorrow, and it's Grand Morph's Home Movies. That'll be great. Wacky Races at 4:20, yes. Then at 4:30, there's the final part of Galloping Galaxies. Who's that character in it that makes me giggle? Dinwiddie Snurdle in Galloping Galaxies. There's Newsround at 4:05, and then at 5:05, there is Gentle Ben. So we will see you tomorrow at 4:10. Don't be late. Take care till then. Bye-bye.